People say you truly know who loves you in your weakest hour. For me, it was the day I went into labor, and in that hour, my husband abandoned me. The sterile light of the hospital flickered as I clutched my belly, waves of pain ripping through me. Nurses rushed past, the sound of heart monitors beeping in the distance. But beside me, his chair sat empty. The man who vowed to protect me wasn't there. Instead of comfort, there was silence. Instead of a hand to hold, there was cold air and unanswered questions. My body shook, not just from contractions, but from the cruel reality that the one person I needed most had chosen to leave me behind. And as the doors of the delivery room closed, my cries echoed down the hallway. Not just cries of childbirth, but of betrayal. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. They say a hospital room is where life begins. For me, it was where my heart cracked open. The contractions had started earlier that morning. Sharp, unforgiving waves that made it hard to even breathe. I remember standing in our marble-floored kitchen, gripping the granite countertop as the first wave hit me like a freight train. The coffee mug I'd been holding shattered against the floor, sending ceramic shards dancing across the pristine tiles we'd picked out together during our second year of marriage. "Not yet," I whispered to my belly, as if I could negotiate with nature itself. "Please, not yet." He promised he'd be here. But my body had other plans. The pain intensified, radiating from my core like lightning strikes, each one stealing my breath and making my vision blur at the edges. I stumbled to the living room, past the family photos that lined our hallway, pictures of happier times when his smile reached his eyes and his arms felt like home instead of a cage. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, whispering through the pain, "It's time. Please, I need you." The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I heard his voice. But it wasn't the voice of concern I expected. It was the voice of a man who'd been interrupted. "What is it, Grace? I'm in the middle of something important. Important. More important than his wife going into labor. More important than his child coming into the world." "The baby," I gasped, another contraction stealing my words. "The baby is coming. Now." But the reply that came wasn't love. It wasn't urgency. It was silence. Then a text, short, cold, detached. "I can't make it." I stared at those words until they blurred with my tears. Couldn't make it? This was our child, our moment. The promise he made when he slid that ring on my finger 7 years ago, standing beneath the oak tree in my parents' backyard, swearing that nothing would ever come between us. And yet, here I was, alone, clutching my stomach, begging strangers to tell me I wasn't dreaming. I called my sister Sarah, my fingers barely able to work the phone as another wave of pain crashed over me. "Sarah," I sobbed into the receiver, "I need help. The baby's coming and Marcus isn't here." "What do you mean he isn't there?" Her voice carried that protective edge it always had when someone threatened me. "Where the hell is he?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I called him and he said he can't make it." "Sarah, I'm scared." "I'm on my way," she said without hesitation. "Don't you dare have that baby before I get there." But 20 minutes later, when Sarah burst through our front door, her face flushed from speeding across town, I was already doubled over on the couch, my water having broken all over our expensive Persian rug. "Oh, honey," she breathed, rushing to my side. "We need to get you to the hospital, right now." The drive was a blur of Sarah's worried glances in the rearview mirror, and my fingers digging into the leather seat as each contraction hit harder than the last. "Where is he, Grace?" Sarah asked as she pulled into the hospital parking lot. "Really? Where is your husband?" I couldn't answer, because deep down I was afraid I already knew. The nurses tried to soothe me, but even their voices carried pity. I could see it in their eyes, that unspoken judgment, that question they dared not ask aloud. "Where is your husband?" The head nurse, Mrs. Patterson, had kind eyes but firm hands as she helped me into the hospital gown. "Is someone coming to be with you, dear?" she asked gently, adjusting my IV line. "My husband should be here any minute." I lied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Mrs. Patterson nodded, but I caught the look she exchanged with the younger nurse. They'd seen this before. Women abandoned at their most vulnerable moments. Women whose partners proved to be strangers when it mattered most. Every second felt like an eternity. The chair beside my bed stayed empty, its shadow stretching across the floor like a cruel reminder. My phone lit up again, and for one hopeful second I thought maybe, just maybe, he had changed his mind. But it wasn't him. It was a notification of flowers being delivered. Not to me, but to someone else. Another woman. The florist's automated message was cheerful, almost mocking. "Your beautiful bouquet of red roses has been delivered to Miss Victoria Sterling. Thank you for choosing Bloom Blossom." Victoria Sterling. The name hit me like ice water. I knew that name. She was the interior designer he'd been working with on his new office building. The same woman who called our house at odd hours, claiming she needed to discuss design concepts. The same woman whose laugh I'd heard in the background during his late-night business calls. Red roses. The same flowers he used to bring me every anniversary. The same flowers he claimed were too cliché when I mentioned missing them last year. My hands shook as I set the phone aside, my vision blurring with tears and rage. The pain of the contractions was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. My breaths came out ragged, my tears mixed with sweat. I whispered into the air, "How could you? How could you do this to me? To us?" Sarah squeezed my hand tighter. "Grace, breathe with me. Focus on the baby. Focus on bringing this beautiful child into the world." But how could I focus when my entire world was collapsing? When the man who'd promised to love me, in sickness and in health, had chosen the exact moment of my greatest vulnerability to prove those words meant nothing. As the hours dragged on, my body gave way to exhaustion. But my mind? It raced with memories. The nights we talked about baby names, lying in bed with his hand on my growing belly, debating whether Oliver or Benjamin sounded stronger, whether our daughter should be named after his grandmother or mine. The promises he made about being the kind of father he never had. How he'd coach Little League and teach our children to ride bikes and never miss a single school play or graduation. The way he swore he'd never leave my side, especially not during the moments that mattered most. "When our baby comes," he'd said just 3 months ago, stroking my hair as we watched a movie. "I'll be right there holding your hand. Nothing will keep me away." All lies. And so, when the final contraction came and the cries of new life filled the room, I should have felt joy. Instead, I felt a hollow silence louder than any scream, because the man who should have been holding my hand wasn't there to hear his child's first breath. The doctors congratulated me. The nurses smiled softly. But as I looked down at my newborn's tiny face, perfect and innocent, with eyes that seemed to search for something they'd never find, a storm brewed inside me. This wasn't just abandonment, it was betrayal. And in that moment I made a silent vow. If he could walk away from me in my weakest hour, then what was coming next would change everything. Looking back, the truth was there all along, hidden in plain sight. At first, it was little things, the way he stopped calling me darling and replaced it with my name, flat and emotionless. The late nights at work that stretched into early mornings. The excuses that never quite added up. But before those little things, there had been bigger signs I'd chosen to ignore. Like the night I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for dinner at Le Bernardin, a restaurant we'd never been to together, but one that charged $300 for 2 people. When I asked him about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. "Business dinner," he said dismissively. "Important client." But the receipt was dated for a Saturday night, and I'd been home that Saturday waiting for him to return from what he'd called a quick meeting. I remember standing in our walk-in closet, holding that receipt, my pregnant belly making it hard to bend down and retrieve it from where it had fallen. The paper felt like evidence of a crime I wasn't ready to prosecute. So I put it back, pretended I'd never seen it. Went downstairs and made his favorite dinner anyway. I remember one evening sitting across from him at the dinner table. I had spent hours preparing his favorite meal, roast chicken, buttery potatoes, the kind of food he once swore made him feel at home. The dining room smelled like rosemary and love, candles flickering between us like we were still the couple who used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. But when he came through the door, his face didn't light up like it used to. He barely looked at me. Instead, he glanced at his phone, then at his watch, then anywhere but into my eyes. "You're late," I whispered, not accusing, just tired. "Work," he muttered, loosening his tie without even greeting me. "Don't start." But it wasn't work. Not really. I saw the perfume on his collar once, a fragrance I didn't wear, something expensive and sultry that clung to his shirt like a confession. I saw the lipstick stain on a coffee cup he left in his car, a shade of red I'd never owned because he once told me red lips made me look too desperate for attention. And though my heart screamed the truth, my mind tried to protect me. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it means nothing. But mistakes don't text you at midnight when your pregnant wife is sleeping beside you. Mistakes don't make you smile at your phone when your wife is standing in the same room, asking if you want more mashed potatoes. I started noticing the pattern. Every time his phone buzzed, his entire demeanor would change. His shoulders would straighten, his eyes would brighten, and for just a moment, he'd look like the man I fell in love with. Excited, alive, engaged. Then he'd remember I was watching and that light would dim again. "Who was that?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice casual. "Nobody important," he'd always answer, but his fingers would linger on the phone, protective, possessive. Nobody important. Yet somehow this nobody important was more captivating than his pregnant wife, more deserving of his attention than the woman carrying his child. Still, I told myself to hold on. Because that's what a wife does, isn't it? She holds on. She forgives. She fights for her family even when the other person has already left the battlefield. But the coldness only grew. I remember the baby shower my mother and Sarah organized. 50 women gathered in our living room laughing, sharing stories about motherhood, oohing and eyeing over tiny clothes and wooden toys. Marcus was supposed to make an appearance just for 20 minutes to thank everyone for coming, to show that united front that married couples are supposed to present. He never showed. When my mother asked where he was, I lied. "Emergency at work," I said, my cheeks burning with shame. "You know how it is." But Mrs. Henderson from next door pulled my mother aside later, and I heard her whisper, "I saw him leaving with a woman this morning. Tall brunette, definitely not Grace." My mother's face went pale. She spent the rest of the party hovering around me, deflecting questions about Marcus with the skill of a diplomat protecting state secrets. I remember once reaching for his hand as we walked into church, my belly swollen with the life we had created together. He pulled away, subtle, but sharp enough to cut. The congregation was full that Sunday morning, familiar faces turning to smile at us as we found our usual pew in the third row. Pastor Williams was delivering a sermon about commitment, about the sacred bonds that hold families together through life's storms. "Marriage," he said, his voice carrying across the vaulted ceiling, "is not just a promise made in good times. It's a covenant that must endure when the winds blow cold and the path grows dark." I glanced at Marcus, wondering if the words would stir something in him, some memory of the vows we'd spoken in this very church. But he was checking his phone again, his thumb scrolling through messages that made him smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. Later in the car, I asked, "Why don't you look at me anymore?" He sighed, heavy with irritation, not even bothering to turn the key in the ignition yet. "You're imagining things. Stop being dramatic." "Dramatic?" The word hung between us like a slap. "Marcus, I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. I'm trying to understand why my husband acts like I'm invisible. He finally started the car, the engine purring to life, but his hands gripped the steering wheel like he was strangling it. Not everything is about you, Grace. I have responsibilities. Pressure you wouldn't understand. Then help me understand, I pleaded. Talk to me. We used to talk about everything. But he just turned up the radio, drowning out my voice with classic rock, the same station we used to sing along to during our weekend drives when we were young and stupid, and thought love was enough to conquer anything. But I wasn't imagining. I wasn't dramatic. I was a wife trying to hold together a marriage that was already slipping through her fingers. And then came the whispers. Friends who hesitated to meet my eyes at the grocery store. Neighbors who exchanged knowing looks when I walked past. My pregnant belly making it impossible to move with any dignity. The tennis club where I'd played every Thursday for 3 years suddenly felt like hostile territory. Women who used to invite me for lunch now spoke in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I approached. My own sister's voice trembling on the phone one night. I don't want to hurt you, but I think he's seeing someone. Sarah, please, I begged, sitting heavily on our leather couch. The same couch where Marcus and I used to curl up together watching old movies. Don't say things like that. He's just distant. It's the stress of the baby coming. Grace, listen to me. Sarah's voice was firm now, the voice she used when she was about to say something I needed to hear but didn't want to. Jenny Morrison saw him at that new wine bar downtown, with a woman, and Grace, they weren't discussing business. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you mean? She said they were intimate, holding hands, kissing, acting like... Sarah's voice broke. Acting like a couple. The room spun around me. I pressed my hand to my belly, feeling my baby kick as if he could sense my distress. That's impossible, I whispered. He wouldn't. Not while I'm pregnant. Not while I'm carrying his child. But even as I said the words, I knew I was trying to convince myself more than Sarah. I didn't want to believe her. I didn't want to believe any of them. Until the night I saw it for myself. It was a Tuesday night in early March. The kind of night when winter felt like it would never end and the promise of spring seemed like a cruel joke. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from carrying 35 pounds of baby weight and pretending my marriage wasn't crumbling. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying every cold shoulder, every unanswered question, every moment when Marcus looked at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his life, uninvited. Around midnight, I heard the front door close. He was finally home from another late meeting. I expected him to come upstairs, maybe check on me, perhaps even apologize for missing dinner again. Instead, I heard his footsteps move toward his study. Then, softly, the sound of his voice. He thought I was asleep. But I woke when I heard him chuckling quietly in the hallway, his voice low and soft in a way he hadn't spoken to me in months. I followed the sound, barefoot, heart pounding, my pregnant belly making each step feel like a betrayal of my own body. And there he was, phone pressed to his ear, smiling. Really smiling. The kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. The kind of smile that used to make my knees weak and my heart race. The kind of smile I thought belonged to me. No, baby, he said, his tone dripping with sweetness I'd forgotten he possessed. You're the only one who makes me feel alive. Don't worry. She'll never know. She'll never know. The words hit me like physical blows. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my hand covering my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. I can't wait to see you tomorrow, he continued, his voice getting softer, more intimate. Wear that blue dress I bought you, the one that drives me crazy. Blue dress. He'd bought her a dress. He hadn't bought me anything in 6 months, not even a card for my birthday. I know this is hard, he whispered into the phone, sneaking around, pretending. But it won't be much longer. After the baby comes, I'll figure out how to handle Grace. She'll understand eventually that we were never really compatible. Handle Grace, like I was a problem to be solved, a complication to be managed. Not his wife, not the mother of his child, just an obstacle between him and his happiness. I should have burst into the hallway right then, should have demanded answers, should have screamed until the neighbors called the police. But I didn't. I froze. Because in that moment, I realized the man I thought I knew, the man I trusted with my life, was already gone. He'd been gone for months, maybe longer, and I'd been living with a ghost, sharing my bed with a stranger, carrying the child of a man who'd checked out of our marriage the moment someone more exciting walked into his life. So by the time the hospital day came, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Maybe his absence was the final chapter in a story that had been ending long before. But knowing the signs doesn't make the betrayal hurt less. It only makes the knife twist deeper. The morning my labor began, I prayed he would prove me wrong. I prayed the man I married, the man I loved, would remember his vows, his promises, his role as a husband and father. I'd barely slept the night before, my body restless with the weight of pregnancy and the heavier weight of suspicion. When the first real contraction hit at dawn, I actually felt a moment of hope. This was it, the moment that would test everything. Surely, when faced with the birth of his child, Marcus would remember who he was supposed to be. As the contractions grew sharper, I clutched my hospital bag, the one I'd packed weeks ago with all the essentials, including the going-home outfit I'd chosen for our baby and the camera I'd hoped Marcus would use to capture our first moments as a family. I whispered, "Please, not today. Please don't let him fail me today." When I called him, my voice weak but steady, he answered with a sigh. Not, "Hello, darling," not, "How are you feeling?" Just a sigh. Like I was interrupting something more important than his wife going into labor. "It's time," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. A pause, long enough to make my heart drop. Long enough for me to hear music in the background, soft jazz, the kind played in expensive restaurants or intimate settings. Then his voice came, flat. "I can't make it right now. Handle it. You'll be fine. Handle it. Handle childbirth alone. Handle bringing his child into the world while he was somewhere else with someone else," I begged through tears. "Please, I need you. I can't do this without you. This is our baby, Marcus. Our baby." He muttered something about being busy, something about complications at work, something that sounded like the same script he'd been reading from for months. Then he hung up. And so I went to the hospital alone. Well, not entirely alone. Sarah was there, and my mother arrived 2 hours later, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Where is that son of a bitch?" she asked Sarah in a voice loud enough for half the maternity ward to hear. "Mom, please," I whispered from my hospital bed, exhausted and embarrassed. "People are staring." "Let them stare," my mother shot back, her eyes blazing with protective rage. What kind of man abandons his wife during childbirth? What kind of father chooses to be anywhere else when his child is being born? The nurses looked at me with pity. They didn't say it out loud, but their eyes screamed the question. "Where is your husband?" One of them even whispered to another, "She's alone? At a time like this?" The whisper carried further than she intended. Soon, word spread quickly through the ward like wildfire in dry grass. A woman laboring alone is always a spectacle. Some women pitied me, shooting sympathetic glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Others smirked as though my humiliation entertained them, as though my pain was somehow deserved. I heard fragments of conversations in the hallway. "Can you believe it? Left her all alone. I heard he's with another woman. Poor thing. What kind of monster? She's better off without him, if you ask me." Every time the door opened, I hoped it would be him. My husband, my partner, rushing in with apologies and explanations and promises to never leave my side again. But it never was. Instead, It was more whispers. Whispers about how he was seen across town at the Harbor View Hotel. Whispers about the woman on his arm. Tall, perfectly dressed, laughing with him as though the world belonged to them. My world was crumbling in a hospital bed, but his was thriving in another woman's presence. The cruelest part wasn't just his absence. It was the knowledge that while I was fighting to bring his child into the world, he was celebrating with someone else. While I was screaming through contractions, he was probably ordering champagne. While I was alone and afraid, he was making promises to another woman that he'd once made to me. I clenched the sheets, my tears soaking the pillow. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. At one point, a nurse tried to encourage me. She held my hand and said, "You're stronger than you think. You don't need anyone else to prove that." But even her kindness couldn't numb the ache of abandonment. Hours passed. My calls went unanswered. My messages left unread. And when the doctor asked, "Should we call the father?" my voice cracked as I said, "No, don't bother, he won't come." Dr. Martinez, a gentleman with kind eyes who'd delivered hundreds of babies, looked at me with something that might have been anger on my behalf. "Mrs. Sterling," he said carefully, "every child deserves to have their father present at birth. Are you certain we shouldn't try to reach him?" "I'm certain," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "He's made his choice, and I've made mine." That night, as my child entered the world, a perfect little boy with his father's nose and what I hoped would be my compassionate heart, I looked at his tiny face, his fragile hands, and I whispered a promise. "You will never feel this kind of abandonment. Not from me." But the truth had already reached me. I didn't just lose a husband that day. I lost the illusion of love, the dream I had built, brick by fragile brick over 7 years of marriage. And when I closed my eyes, exhausted, one question echoed. How could a man turn his back on his wife, his child, his own blood, just to chase a lie? I thought the humiliation was already complete. I thought nothing could hurt more than giving birth alone while my husband was nowhere to be found. His phone switched off, while whispers in the ward told me he was seen at a hotel with another woman. The loneliness of that night clung to me like a second skin. But I was wrong. The unexpected was still waiting. 2 days passed in the hospital. 2 days of feeding my son, learning to change diapers with trembling hands, trying to figure out how to be a mother while my heart felt like it was bleeding internally. Marcus never called, never visited, never asked about his son. The silence was deafening. On the morning I was scheduled to be discharged, I sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, my son sleeping peacefully in my arms, when Sarah burst through the door with a look I'd never seen before. "Grace," she said, her voice urgent. "We need to talk. Right now." "What's wrong?" I asked, though I wasn't sure my heart could handle any more wrong. "I've been doing some digging," she said, pulling up a chair beside me. "About Marcus, about his business, about everything." She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she scrolled through screenshots. "Grace, he's been moving money, large amounts, for months." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean, moving money?" "Bank transfers, property transfers, investment accounts, all being shifted around, all being moved out of your joint accounts and into..." She hesitated. "Into accounts with another woman's name on them. Victoria Sterling, the name I'd seen on that flower delivery notification, the same name that was now apparently on my bank accounts." "How do you know this?" I whispered. "Jenny Morrison's husband works at First National. He saw the paperwork and recognized your name." "Grace, honey, he's been planning this. For months." The room felt like it was tilting. My baby stirred in my arms, making soft little sounds that should have been comforting, but instead made me realize how vulnerable we both were. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Everything," Sarah said, tears forming in her eyes. The savings accounts, the investment portfolio, even the house, Grace. He's been transferring everything while you were pregnant, while you were trusting him, while you were planning a future together. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated, planned, executed while I was carrying his child, believing we were building a life together. "There's more," Sarah said gently. "Jenny's husband said the transactions were being processed yesterday, while you were in labor." While I was in labor. While I was screaming his name between contractions, begging for him to come, he was signing papers to steal my future. The morning sun filtered weakly through the hospital blinds when Mr. Callahan arrived. I sat propped up in the stiff chair beside my bed, my newborn son bundled against my chest. My eyes were raw from crying, my body sore, but I hummed softly to him, trying to keep him from sensing the storm raging inside me. That's when the door opened, and in walked Mr. Callahan, our family lawyer. He wasn't smiling, and that alone made my stomach knot. He carried a leather folder tucked under his arm, his footsteps careful, like a man who knew the ground he was about to step on could break everything. "Grace," he said gently, his voice lowering as he pulled up a chair. "I need you to sit down for this." I clutched my baby tighter. "What now?" My voice cracked, brittle from exhaustion. What more could possibly be taken from me? Mr. Callahan had been our lawyer for 5 years, handling everything from our house purchase to Marcus's business contracts. He'd watched our marriage from the beginning, had been present at every major milestone. His face now carried the weight of terrible knowledge. He hesitated, his weathered hands resting on the folder. "Your husband hasn't just abandoned you. He's been moving assets, quietly, strategically, bank accounts, properties, even your home. Everything transferred into another woman's name." I felt my heart slam against my ribs. Another woman? The words caught in my throat like glass. He slid the folder across to me, the leather smooth and cold under my trembling fingers. "I didn't go looking for this, Grace. The paperwork came across my desk by chance. When I checked the dates..." His voice hardened. "He signed them while you were in labor." My hand shook as I opened the folder. Document after document glared back at me. Transfer slips, notarized deeds, property titles. Page after page of my life being erased, my security being stolen, my future being handed to a stranger. The signature was the same every time. His. Marcus Allen Sterling, written in the confident flourish I used to find attractive. The man I married, the man I trusted, had tried to erase me while I fought for my life to bring his child into the world. "He wanted to leave me with nothing," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Not even a roof over my baby's head." But then Mr. Callahan leaned closer, and something shifted in his expression. His tone changed from sympathetic to something that almost sounded like satisfaction. "That's where he failed, Grace. He forgot about the prenup clause, the one he insisted on years ago. Do you remember?" My mind flickered back. Late nights at his office during our engagement, me signing papers I barely read because I trusted him completely. "I want to protect both of us," he'd said then, his hand covering mine as I signed document after document. "Just standard stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." I nodded weakly at Mr. Callahan. "You both agreed," Mr. Callahan continued, his voice gaining strength, "that if either party ever abandoned the other during a medical emergency, specifically including childbirth, every asset would default to the abandoned spouse. His business shares, his houses, his accounts. Grace, by law, you now own everything." For a moment the room spun. The irony was so perfect, so complete, that I almost laughed. Marcus, in his arrogance, had written his own downfall into our prenuptial agreement. He'd been so confident in his own character, so certain he'd never be the type of man to abandon his wife, that he'd agreed to terms that now guaranteed his destruction. My baby stirred, and I pressed a kiss to his tiny forehead, anchoring myself in the only reality that mattered. "He played himself," I whispered, and for the first time in months I felt something that wasn't pain or fear. I felt power. Later that evening, the door opened again. My husband walked in, wearing the same smug confidence he always wore when he thought he could talk his way out of anything. He carried no flowers, no gift, not even shame, just a smirk and the kind of casual arrogance that had once attracted me but now made my skin crawl. "Grace," he started, straightening his expensive tie as if he were walking into a business meeting instead of facing the wife he'd abandoned. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand." His hair was perfectly styled. His suit was immaculate. He smelled like expensive cologne and someone else's perfume. This was a man who'd had time to shower, to dress, to make himself presentable for someone who wasn't me. I didn't let him finish. Quietly, I slid the folder across the table, the leather making a soft, whisking sound against the hospital surface. "What's this?" he scoffed, flipping it open. His brow furrowed as his eyes darted across the pages. The color drained from his face. His smirk faltered. "You left me when I needed you most," I said, my voice steady now, stronger than I felt. "And in doing so, you gave me everything you thought you could steal. You abandoned me and handed me your empire." His hands trembled. "Grace, please listen. It wasn't like that. I panicked. I made mistakes." I shook my head. "No, you made choices. You chose her. You chose greed. And now the law has chosen me." He staggered back, clutching the folder as if the papers inside might dissolve if he held them tighter. "Grace, I can fix this. I'll undo it all. Just give me a chance." I stood slowly, cradling our son in my arms. My cheek still bore the faint traces of tears, but my eyes were steel. There's no fixing abandonment. There's no undoing betrayal. All that's left is for you to live with the cost. Silence swallowed the room. For the first time since I married him, he had no power, no words, no dominance. Just a broken man staring at the life he had thrown away. And as I turned my back on him, holding my child closer, I felt it. The unexpected. Not just justice. Victory. The days that followed were a blur of whispers, headlines, and shifting power. For years, his name had been carved in stone on buildings, splashed across magazines, spoken with admiration at charity galas. But now those same lips spoke his name with contempt. The man who abandoned his wife in labor, the man who lost everything to greed. I stayed quiet, cradling my son as the storm raged outside. I didn't need revenge. The truth was louder than any punishment I could invent. Everywhere he turned, doors closed. Business partners withdrew. Banks froze accounts. His mistress, so bold in whispers, vanished as soon as his empire crumbled. One evening, weeks later, I found him waiting outside the courthouse, thinner, paler, his arrogance carved down to a shell. He looked at me like a beggar staring at bread. "Grace," he pleaded, his voice rough. "Please, I've lost everything. Just let me see my son." I held his gaze steady. "You lost him the moment you walked out of that hospital. He will grow up knowing love, respect, and strength, not betrayal." His shoulders sagged. For the first time, he said nothing. No excuses, no lies. Just silence, the kind that comes when a man finally faces the cost of his choices. And as I turned to leave, I realized something. The unexpected twist wasn't just the assets or the wealth. It was me, the strength I never thought I had, the courage to raise my son alone, to walk away from a man who mistook cruelty for power, and to finally understand that sometimes the greatest justice is simply survival and peace. I kissed my baby's forehead, whispering, "You will never know the pain I endured, only the love I fought to give you." And with that, I stepped into the light, leaving behind not just him, but the version of myself that once thought I couldn't live without him. Because the truth is, I had already won the moment I chose to never bow to his betrayal. Now, if I may ask, what do you think? Should Grace have forgiven him for the sake of their son, or was walking away the only justice he deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next.